Can you hear me?
Yes. Yahsa, did you say something?
Can you hear me?
Yep, I
Great.
think you're good.
Thank you.
And I'm assuming you can all hear me and see me, so yes, we're okay. And Christine, would you like us to keep our video off when we're not speaking?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not the host. I'm just the chat moderator, so I'm not sure if that's my call.
Okay, sorry. My bad.
Michelle, do you know if there's any requirement that whether people need to show their videos, or I think it's up to you whether you want to do that during the session when people are not presenting.
I think if you're not speaking, you can turn off your video, and then during the Q&A, you could all turn it back on if you're all going to be answering questions.
But for the attendees and the panelists, it's really up to them, right?
Yeah, this is a webinar, so the attendees are not on video, only the panelists.
Okay.
So I think we're waiting for a couple more panelists to join.
Oh, actually, we are all set because not like a slightly smaller group of us are going to be.
Oh, okay.
So,
Guy is not coming?
Yeah, no. So we're all here. We're good.
Oh, okay. Good to know.
Sorry, we had
excellent.
A little bit of, like, switching up who exactly was going to come on camera today, but this is us. Yeah, we're here.
Okay, cool. So we're all set. The only thing is, Jeanette or Christine, you can resume the recording whenever you're ready because it's paused. But other than that, I'm going to make Jeanette the host.
Okay, we got 1 minute until it begins. Since everybody's here, I think we can probably just get started with the introductions. Okay, so you should be seeing a slide right now with the links, some links on it to this conference. First of all, my name is Jeanette Ho. I'm going to be moderating this session, and Christine DeLizer-Tiedman, she's going to be moderating the chat. So I'd like to welcome you to the session. We're going to have 2 presentations this morning. The first one is standard citation forms for rare materials cataloging Wikidata by Dobbs. And the second presentation is called Everyone Can Edit, Cross-Collaboration at NYU on the program of Cooperative Cataloging Wikidata pilot. And there'll be various presenters for that. So I'd just like to draw your attention first to some important links. So we got a link to the conference website, the code of conduct. We're also on Twitter. So we have an address as well as a hashtag that people can use to tweet about different events during the conference. And we also invite people to sign up to join our Slack channel if you haven't already done so. We've got various channels set up for various themes. So you can go afterwards, after the session, over to our Wikidata channel and continue the conversation there after the session is ended. We've also got a tech support channel on Slack. So if you run into any technical difficulties with SCED or with Zoom, then you can go ahead and post questions on this channel. And finally, we have a collaborative project on Wikidata. So if you can go to this link, you can explore a little bit more. It has links to its project page. So what they're doing is editing Wikidata by creating and reconciling items in this data set for Latin American people related to the Latin American film industry. And so that might be we've gotten a lot of good participation so far. So if you're interested in learning more about it, you can also go to those links, that link. So, so we're going to start with the two presentations, and then afterwards we're going to have a Q&A. And for the question and answer session, we'd encourage you to go to the Q&A feature on Zoom to ask the questions rather than through chat or raising your hand. So that's what we'd like to encourage. But again, that'll be at the end after both presentations. So I think we'll start with the first one on the standard citation forms for rare materials, cataloging Wikidata. So it'll be by Zoe Dobbs. She's the catalog metadata librarian at the Binding Rare Book and Manuscript Library at Yale University. She's interested in harnessing linked data to improve the description and discovery of rare materials, and her participation in the Wikidata pilot has proven to be an excellent outlet for this interest. So Zoe, anytime you're ready, feel free to share your camera and get started.
Thanks, Jeanette, for that introduction. I'm just going to share the correct screen. There we go. I hope everyone can see my slides. All right. So, like I said, thanks for that introduction, Jeanette, and thank you all for being here today. In addition to all this, I'm also currently the project lead for the Yale University Libraries PCC Wikidata pilot project. So I'll just provide a brief overview of the overarching project before getting into our specific project. So in August 2020, the program for cooperative cataloging launched a new pilot project to engage with the Wikidata platform and community through a variety of sub-projects developed by participating institutions. And most of these projects are focused on the use of Wikidata as an identifier hub that can help link library resources to the wider web. So for this talk, I can't go into the nuts and bolts of what Wikidata is and how it functions, but there are some really great Wikidata related sessions at this conference, and I hope you can take advantage of those as well. So for Yale University Libraries project specifically, we actually focused on multiple entity types, but for this talk, I'm going to focus on one type. They are bibliographic entities from the standard citation forms for rare materials cataloging database, or I'm going to refer to it as SCF for short. And SCF is a resource used by the rare book community to identify and describe bibliographies, wherein each bibliography is uniquely identified by a standardized citation string, which often looks something like this. And catalogers working in MARC insert these strings into a 510 subfield A with a page number or a location in the bibliography in the subfield C, indicating that the resource that is described by this particular catalog record is also described in this external resource in this bibliography, which is identified via this string. So the string functions as an identifier in this database. However, the editorial group for the SCF database has recently been exploring the addition of URIs to their individual entries in order to make the database more linked data friendly. And they have identified Wikidata as one source of potential URIs, which is what inspired our project in part. Another reason for our focus on these entities from this database is that we already cite bibliographies from this database quite a lot in Yale University Libraries catalog. And so this project could also aid in the cleanup and standardization of these entities, as well as their enrichment with URIs in our own catalog. So here is a general outline of our work plan. And I just want to draw your attention to the fact that we are focused on creating an application profile, mapping the SCF structure to Wikidata, and then we are focusing on actually bulk uploading a set of items into Wikidata. So I know some projects focused on manual editing, and we wanted to explore what bulk editing could look like. So at the beginning of the project, we sent out a survey trying to gauge everyone's familiarity with Wikidata, and it trended towards kind of on the lower end of the familiarity. So we started by educating ourselves through some self-directed Wikidata training through the Wiki Education Dashboard. Also the LD4 affinity group for Wikidata, as well as the PCC Wikidata pilot listserv were also very helpful. But in addition, we actually brought in Morelis Lemus Rojas from IUPUI, who is open knowledge librarian there, but she is also an active member of the WikiProject Books within Wikidata. And she very helpfully provided us with an overview of Wikidata and its library applications, walked us through their specific books data model, and the process of how to create items, add statements, add references, etc. And it gave us some good, valuable hands-on practice creating preliminary items. And this training was important to inform our later modeling and the review and enhancement project of our items. So speaking of modeling, our next step was to actually model the standard citation forms entry structure in Wikidata. So this is an example of what an entry looks like. Does it look familiar? I would say it's structured very similarly to a MARC record. And I would also say that an entry in SCF is roughly equivalent to a BibFrame instance. If you're familiar with BibFrame, an RDA manifestation, and also what is known as an edition in Wikidata. So we based our application profile largely on the WikiProject Books data model within Wikidata, and members of this Wiki project work together to develop best practices and data models for bibliographic data in Wikidata. So according to them, they based their data model on the functional requirements for bibliographic records conceptual model known as FRBR, except that the expression and manifestation levels are actually collapsed into a single Wikidata entity called an edition. So like BibFrame, in Wikidata, there are 3 levels known as the work, the edition, and the exemplar. So interestingly, their data model also has a provision for a combined work and edition entity in some instances. And we actually discussed among ourselves whether we wanted to take this route. So one pro of that is that it would, of course, make our application profile much simpler. There would be a one-to-one relationship between the entries in the SCF database and the Wikidata items we created, and there would be fewer items created overall. However, as we really dug into this data, we realized that many of the bibliographies in the database are actually multiple editions of the same work, and this relationship would be lost if we combined works and editions together. And similarly, separating them out would set the stage for more editions of the same work to be added to Wikidata after the fact, either by us or by other editors. And lastly, we realized that this combined work and edition entity really more closely resembles what we had already been doing with MARC and the structure of a MARC record, which is something we've been trying to move away from as we've been moving towards more linked data friendly data models such as BibFrame. So in the end, we decided to follow the separate work and edition model. And I invite you to click through this link when I will share the slides later, because the data model is actually quite detailed compared to some of the other Wiki project models I've observed. It includes properties that can be used at each of the bibliographic levels. Although I would say that usage or adherence to this model within Wikidata itself is rather inconsistent, and the majority of monographic entities that I've noticed in Wikidata are actually those combined works in additions. So it's a structure that is hard for us to get away from. So again, if you have the slides later and click through this link, you can see our full application profile. I can't go into too much detail, but the most important thing to understand is, like most linked database data models, almost all values for each of the Wikidata statements should be Wikidata items. So they should be entities with URIs themselves, and very few should be strings. However, if you're familiar with MARC, SCF is very much like MARC in that almost all fields are populated by strings. So I'd argue that rare materials cataloging especially relies on strings because currently there's just no machine readable way to represent a lot of our specialized metadata in the systems we have now. And this complicates certain aspects of mapping. I can only go through a few examples, but actually there. So what to do if an author or a publisher does not have a Wikidata item? These were some of our solutions. There's the handy author name string property. And then for publisher strings, this is the solution we came up with. Similarly, very common with our entries are date ranges for publication. And this is how we ended up handling that. And likewise, also multiple publishers and multiple places of publication and how to associate those with each other. So this is the solution we came upon. Not all of these solutions are perfect, and some of them cause problems later, but this is the best we could do at the time. So, and lastly, importantly, what to do with that standard citation string itself. So the foundation of the entire SCF database really is that string. It is the functional identifier for the database. But since the whole point of linked data is to move from strings to things, what do we do with the string, and do we need it at all anymore? And we decided actually not to include the string in our Wikidata items. Instead, we proposed a new property to link back out to the standard citation forms database so that readers or users could eventually find the string using that ID. So our next step after that was transforming and mapping data with OpenRefine. And OpenRefine was really a lifesaver for this project. It was a super powerful tool for cleaning, parsing, reconciling data. And this is just an example of what it looks like. But we used it not only to clean up our data and split some of our fields, such as splitting imprint into place of publication, publisher, and date, but we also use the handy reconcile function to reconcile values against Wikidata entities to perform matches to help with the upload. And speaking of the upload, that is another function of OpenRefine that was very helpful. You can use your application profile to create a Wikidata schema to upload into Wikidata. And due to the nature of our project that was focused on this batch upload, it did result in some additional mapping limitations that were unexpected. And it boiled down to the fact that just because a human can map something does not mean a machine can. So for example, some values could be mapped to Wikidata items by humans relatively easily, but they are housed deep within complex strings that cannot always be easily parsed automatically. So for example, these reprint and supplement notes, or even this complicated extent, a human more or less can pull out the important information and map it to Wikidata items, but it is much more difficult to parse automatically using OpenRefine. I would say it's not impossible, but it was a little difficult, and it became too time consuming for me personally to attempt. So other issues we ran into were values that could actually be automatically mapped, but they could not be easily reconciled to Wikidata items. So reconciliation is not perfect. And one big culprit that revealed this was Library of Congress subject headings. I'm sure you can imagine those complex post-coordinated strings are not friendly when trying to match to Wikidata items. And we eventually decided to do away with any automatic reconciliation or mapping of subject headings with OpenRefine. So as you can imagine, here I'm just going to show a picture. This is what the Wikidata schema looks like. So this whole transformation uploading process became a bit unexpectedly time consuming, not only due to the messiness and inconsistencies of the source data, which made cleaning and reconciliation very difficult, but also that combined with the way in which OpenRefine uploads statements to Wikidata meant that our data model had some unforeseen implications, especially resulting that uploads had to happen in stages depending on whether certain entities had statements in certain areas or not, to avoid uploading empty statements, excuse me. So other complications we ran into were items that already existed in Wikidata. We tried to reconcile our works and editions to try and determine whether any of them were already in Wikidata. But then once there was a match, then we had to determine things like, was it matching at the work or edition level? Would information be duplicated if we went ahead and performed the automatic upload, or should we manually add information instead? So related to the work edition relationship was also the what became an unsystematic process of determining which titles from the SCF database were different editions of the same work. It was something that it was difficult to catch all of the work edition relationships, although we tried our best. So takeaways from this process, I think, is to recognize that mapping for humans is not the same as mapping for machines, and a data model that might seem straightforward when implemented by humans becomes increasingly complex as it is automated, especially depending on the tools that you're using. And in the end, not everything can be automated, which leads us to the human review and enhancement portion, where we members of our pilot team reviewed a subset of Wikidata items that were uploaded to observe any outstanding issues with the mapping, and then to perform also manual enhancement to add statements that were difficult to add automatically, such as subjects, reprint and supplement information, doing Wikidata authority work for author name strings and publisher strings. And we had initially, we were initially going to add extent information as well, but right now we're taking a pause on that pending further investigation of ways that we can represent some of the more complicated extents in Wikidata and exploring any options beyond the rather limited properties of number of pages and number of parts of this work. So stay tuned for that. We're still working that part out, but this review and enhancement process, it's still ongoing. And but I believe that pilot members will be able to use their Wikidata training experience to explore even more properties that would be a good fit for items. And I think their feedback will be really valuable for informing any future YUL Wikidata work. So for next steps in our project, the final official step in our work plan is to enrich the YUL catalog with URIs from Wikidata. So the Wikidata URI would go in the 510 subfield U. And we also plan to reconcile subfield A, which should hold the current and updated form of the standard citation string. So we are going to try to do that as well to the best of our ability. And this is still in the future, but right now the plan is to use the reconcile CSV service in OpenRefine, which lets you reconcile a data set against a CSV file of your own making. So I'm going to play around with that and see how well it works for these activities. But in addition to that, further off into the future, I do realize that new SCF entries are continually being added to that database. And I think it would be beneficial to develop a process of streamlining the workflow between adding new SCF entities to Wikidata and then integrating Wikidata URIs back into the database and working with the editorial group to streamline that workflow, in addition to getting feedback from them, of course, about our data modeling. And I would just say more generally, further into the future, as more libraries and organizations consider Wikidata as a possible destination for linked bibliographic metadata, I think it becomes even more important to create shared data models and workflows among ourselves, not only to promote consistency, but also to reduce friction and make this entire process easier so we can increase the amount and the diversity of bibliographic metadata in Wikidata. And I will just leave you all with the idea that I saw on the PCC Wikidata pilot email list that said something like, what if LC or PCC developed or approved a data model for books in Wikidata, integrating both the best practices regarding the WikiProject Books in Wikidata and the PCC's own practices related to IFLA, LRM, and BibFrame. So I think that's a really interesting idea, and I'm excited to see more on that, and I hope I will in the future. So thank you. And last there, I have to thank our entire pilot project team who have been exploring this new world of Wikidata with us. And especially I want to thank Tim Thompson, who was the former team lead up until recently, and he really set the stage and worked out a plan for us that led us up into this point. So many thanks to him and to everyone for that.
Well, thank you. That was great. So our next presentation is also about the Wikidata pilot project. Again, everyone can edit cross-collaboration at NYU on the program for cooperative cataloging. And so we have several speakers. I'm not sure all of them are here, but they include from NYU, Everett Allgood, who is the serials cataloger and authority control librarian, Charlene Chou, who is the head of knowledge access, Beth Katzoff, the East Asian Studies librarian, Alexandra Provo, the metadata librarian, and Yahsa Razizadeh, who's the cataloging supervisor of metadata production management. Also, they include Alla Roylance, who's the librarian for Russian and Slavic studies and linguistics, and Gioia Stevens, the librarian for specialized cataloging. So you can just feel free to get started.
Great, thank you so much, Jeanette. And thank you everyone for joining. Thanks Zoe for a great presentation. That was really awesome. So yeah, we'll be presenting today on the topic, Everyone Can Edit, Cross-Collaboration on the Program for Cooperative Cataloging Wikidata Pilot. So as Jeanette introduced, here's us, here's who will be speaking with you today. My name is Alex Provo, and I'll kind of be your MC for this presentation, but mostly you'll be hearing from the folks listed here on the screen. And before we begin, I want to acknowledge the contributions of the other members of our pilot. We're a pretty big group, and we're all working together. So you can see our whole cohort here on the screen. Our agenda for this presentation is to first provide a brief introduction to previous Wikidata activity at NYU Libraries, following an overview of the PCC and its Wikidata pilot. Actually, we'll probably skip that since Zoe did a great job of introducing it. We'll spend the bulk of our time hearing from each pilot project about its goals and outcomes. And to conclude, we'll share a few thoughts about overall pilot outcomes and impacts. So the work we'll be talking about today builds on other activity at NYU Libraries. Recent NYU Libraries engagement with the Wiki universe began in January of 2019 with the formation of the Wikimedians at NYU Libraries Learning Group. Within CARMS, which is our technical services department, Wikidata is starting to be integrated into workflows. And in the interest of time, I'll skip over all of the specifics, but you can check out this slide later if you're curious. So our pilot is part of the PCC, The Program for Cooperative Cataloging is an international cooperative that shares cataloging effort across institutions. It maintains best practices, facilitates training, and experiments with new technologies. And it consists of 4 constituent programs: BibCo for monographs, Conser for serials, NACO for name authorities, and SACO for subject authorities. So as Zoe mentioned, the Wikidata pilot within the PCC is kind of an international cohort. It meets monthly. In addition to this international cross-collaboration, at NYU Libraries, we meet monthly as a whole group to share updates and discover common issues. Participants hail from several departments listed here on the screen. And our overarching goals are to learn about Wikidata's data models, platforms, and tools, to prototype workflows, and to develop blueprints for future projects. So at NYU Libraries, we are currently working on a range of pilot projects, which will present in groups roughly corresponding to the PCC programs. And I'll start off our bibliographic focus with a bit about our Tamiment Wagner digitized serials project. So one of our special collections, the Tamiment Library and Robert F. Wagner Labor Archives, holds a small collection of leftist periodicals that were recently digitized by our Digital Library Technology Services unit in 2018 and 2019. So in the process of producing approximately 13 to 15 Conser bib record descriptions, we began inserting URIs as part of another PCC pilot project, the URIs in MARC pilot. And this kind of naturally led us to start working in Wikidata. So we were thrilled when the Wikidata pilot got started up. And as a PCC library for 20 plus years, Conser serial bib descriptions are quite familiar and stable ground for us at NYU. Wikidata, on the other hand, has provided a platform where we can revisit and reconsider some of our past decisions and policies. And so as some of my co-presenters will point out, editors on Wikidata make different modeling decisions and do not always follow what we in libraries might consider best practices. This is also true when describing continuing resource entities. So by studying these entity descriptions and Wikidata models, we hope to better understand and appreciate the serial data attributes considered most important by non-library Wikidata editors and users. As well, by cross-populating links and identifiers, our intention is really to enhance discoverability and facilitate user access on both platforms. So in our bibliographic databases as well as Wikidata. And now I will turn it over to Beth and Alla to discuss their Manga project.
Hi, I'm Beth Katzoff. Well, first, manga is a style of comic books that originated in Japan, but are now produced all over the world. Here's an example of Japanese manga on the left and Russian manga on the right from the NYU Library collections. Next slide, please. So what is global manga? Global manga refers to a style of comic books created by local artists in the style of traditional Japanese manga or noticeably aesthetically influenced by it. Next slide, please. So what have we done so far? We've created a WikiProject page which details the workflow and 4 separate lists of properties for titles, for creators, which may include creative cooperatives or authors as well, and for manga periodicals and manga publishers. But we've also created an evolving template for editing existing Wikidata pages and creating new ones. We examined existing manga pages for both authors and titles in multiple languages to see what's included on these pages, what's missing, and this enabled us to identify the descriptions, both the statements and the identifiers that we want to include for each item. We also created a list of manga in the NYU Library collections for Wikidata editing based on creator or author and title. And this was essential for us. For Japanese manga, we used OpenRefine, an open source tool for identifying and importing Q numbers, and Zoe Dobbs talked about this in her presentation. And so we used it in a similar way to look at titles and authors in the NYU Japanese manga collection list. We have about 298 titles of Japanese manga. 236 of these are what we call shoujo manga, or young girl manga, or targeted manga targeted toward young girls. Many were written by women manga artists. So there's a lot of interesting information about this particular collection. And so then we started editing Wikidata based on the Q numbers that were found through this OpenRefine reconciliation process. And that enabled us to both edit the Wikidata pages and continually revise our template. Partway through the project, we created work and edition pages with information specifically based on the NYU collection. I'll turn it to my colleague, Alla.
Hi, can you hear and see me? My name is Alla Roylance. I am a Russian and Slavic librarian and librarian for linguistics at NYU. And I also do the cataloging, and this is how I was sucked into this idea of this manga Wikidata activity in the library. So Russian manga is a real phenomenon. A lot of Russian artists call themselves mangaka, but it is much smaller, obviously, in scale than Japanese manga. And on Wikipedia, it enjoys almost no representation in all Wikidata. So Russian end of this project involves manual creation of new Wikidata items, basically from scratch. As a result, I developed the interest in manga produced in the region where, in my geographic area of studies, I have reached out to our Polish and Czech vendors and placed special orders for graphic novels with a special emphasis on local artists who work in the manga style. So limited number of Czech manga already arrived. We are now expecting shipments from Poland and Ukraine. And we also updated our approval plans with suppliers from these countries to include graphic novels with a special request for manga. Next slide, please.
So what have we learned? It was clear that the manga anime Wikidata community is already global. There are related projects that are not necessarily just about manga, like the Comic Arts Wikidata project, WikiProject Anime and Manga, Art and Feminism, and others. And there are many ways to link manga to other media, anime, television series, live action film, theater, like novels. And so in this way, we found a lot of the information in Wikidata is mixed. Some manga pages have inconsistent descriptions, and these inconsistencies raise questions about how we edit our existing pages or decide on terms for those that are newly created. One example is this term mangaka that Alla just mentioned. It's manga artist or manga author, but sometimes it says josei mangaka, which is woman manga artist, not necessarily needed, but there are variations on this term. The global community of Wikidata editors have changed some of what we have already created. And one example is the term shoujo, which is manga aimed at a teenage female readership. And some of that has been removed from our genre headings and put as intended public as that property instead. So these issues remain under discussion. If you take out shoujo, what about seinen, which is targeted toward young boys? Like, this is definitely a continued discussion to have. Next slide, please.
So on this slide, you actually see the example, the sample of Czech manga periodical. What our goals are. So looking forward with this project. Our goal is to use Wikidata to highlight NYU Libraries' collection of manga as represented in books and periodicals produced in Japan, Russia, other countries from East Asia and Eastern Europe, and possibly in future other areas, and to document the evolution of this genre as a global phenomenon. This project can help us fill the gaps in collection development, and as we identify new formats and global connections, and the project helps us to, as reference librarians, to suggest areas of research using the manga at NYU. So the goal number one is to highlight the collection with all that comes with this, all the semantic web that comes with this, to create a workflow and the blueprint for future potential contributors and collaborators, and for future development of this project when our collection starts incorporating manga produced in other regions of the world. And goal number three is to evaluate our collection of manga and other graphic novels. They're not very well represented in North American academic library collections, for example. Revise our collection development strategy and introduce these materials into teaching curricula. This is all we have to say about manga for today.
Thank you, Beth and Alla. Next, I'll turn it over to Yahsa to talk about our Afghanistan Digital Library Wikidata project.
Thanks, Alex. So the Afghanistan Digital Library is an NEH-funded NYU Libraries project that began in 2005. It aims to retrieve and restore the first 60 years of Afghanistan's published cultural heritage. Because of years of war in Afghanistan, these materials are scarce, and preserving them and making them available is really important. Most are held in private collections, and this project aims to make them publicly accessible. Next slide, please. The project has been collecting, cataloging, digitizing, and making available online in an open access platform as many Afghan publications from the period 1871 to 1930, as it's been possible to identify and locate. To date, 576 titles have been digitized. Next slide, please. So I think this collection works particularly well as a PCC Wikidata pilot project, because increasing the discoverability of these materials through linked data aligns so closely with the overall and initial aim of the ADL project. It also helps that it's a small and well-defined corpus of 576 books, as mentioned. So there are 4 categories of entities for which we're creating Wikidata items, similar to the Manga project. For works, authors, publishers / printers, and government agencies that are represented in the collection. The latter category is actually unique to this pilot project, since many of these books were published by official agencies and ministries in Afghanistan. Something else that came up in considering our publisher items is the need to distinguish between items for publishers and printers. And one of the questions we came across initially was how we should transliterate titles, authors, etc. in the Wikidata item label. I think this issue stood out to me in particular as a language cataloger. To maintain the diacritics as required in Library of Congress transliteration that we use in our cataloging would conform with how they appear in our MARC records in our systems. But we learned that Wikidata conventions seem to exclude diacritics in labels, which is a divergence from what we're used to in our metadata. So we're including the Library of Congress transliteration as an alternative form of the label and as an additional property. But it's still an ongoing conversation, and I'm sure we'll come across a lot of similar questions as we continue with the project. So far, we've pulled all the author names out of the set of MARC records, and I'm creating Wikidata items for authors where they don't yet exist in Wikidata, and enriching the items that already do exist. Guy Burak is doing the same for publishers and governmental agencies. But there's plenty of work left to do, especially with OpenRefine using the process that Beth described and Zoe showed in her presentation. So we're looking forward to that. The process of pulling out data from our MARC records and isolating data from specific fields, so it was easily comparable, brought to light the fact that we had some author and publisher names transliterated in several different ways between existing MARC records for this collection. So an unexpected outcome of this project has been to, as a next step, actually go back into the MARC record set for this collection and standardize those elements. I think that's something that's common to all of our pilot projects, which is that we're learning a lot of unexpected but useful things about our subset of materials when looking at them through the lens of a Wikidata project. So that's all from me. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Yahsa. Let's move my slides over. So the next projects we'll speak about relate to name authorities. And to start us off, I'll pass it over to Everett to talk about our faculty name identifiers pilot.
Good morning. Thank you, Alex. So as advertised, the focus of this project is on enriching and, when necessary, creating unique NYU faculty identifiers. The project is not new. The NACO component of this project began in the late 1990s. What is new is the dual Library of Congress name authority file plus Wikidata focus and the institutional support expressed by NYU. This has helped to reinvigorate our project that had long been going on. Because faculty members and their research output represent a core resource of the university, this project benefits both our local campus community and the wider research initiatives. Next slide, please. So when creating and enriching Library of Congress name authorities, name identifiers, it typically requires encoding lots of attribute data by hand. So it's quite labor intensive. One of the many appeals of Wikidata in terms of looking at how we can do this in another platform is the ability to batch process and automate much of this hand coding by using, as Zoe recommended earlier, OpenRefine, quick statements, etc. So we're really interested in that aspect of the project. Next slide, please. Let's see. So let's talk about where we are, what our goals are, where we think this is happening. So there's lots of cross-pollination going on right now among the different identifier platforms between LCNF and Wikidata, and we're doing lots of that backing out, back and forth. With shout outs to Stanford, the University of Washington, and several other Wikidata participants, NYU has developed basic, core, and extended data models of properties for describing our faculty members. Some of these we plan to try and incorporate via batch processing. Others we realize we may need to hand code. So it's a mix right now, just as Zoe mentioned earlier, and others. Finally, NACO catalogers are currently grappling with ethical considerations when creating and enriching library name identifiers. Wikidata items raise similar questions. Furthermore, because Wikidata represents a larger, more open platform, concerns regarding privacy and individual consent are only amplified and more important for us to address and for the PCC to address. That's all for me, and I don't know if you want me to pass this to Gioia, or shall I pass this back to Alex?
I got it. Thank you so much, Everett. Now I'll pass it to Gioia to talk about the Downtown Collection Names project.
Okay, thank you, Alex. This project focuses on the Downtown Collection, which is a large collection in the NYU Libraries Special Collections, focusing on the downtown art scene in New York City from the 1970s to the 1990s. It has large holdings of printed material and archival holdings. And it contains many unique items related to the New York City downtown art scene that are not held at other libraries. And as parts of the collection are so specialized, many of these less well-known creators do not have authority records in NACO. So next slide, please. So the project goals are to focus on name authority work for people who are creators or subjects in the collection, and to plan to link, enrich, or create new items in both NACO and Wikidata. So some of the names are in Wikidata because of recently created Wikipedia pages, and it's possible to use this information to create NACO records and to link between both platforms. So my plan is to create NACO Lite records using our project's NACO Lite and Wikidata properties table. So next slide, please. This is the workflow that I have been using. I downloaded a 9,000 name record set from our ILS in MarcEdit. So it's all of the names on bibliographic rather than archival records for the downtown collection. I then use the MarcEdit reconciliation tool, the MarcEdit validate headings function to reconcile against LCNAV. This tool has a very precise match. So many names failed to reconcile due to punctuation, birth and death dates, and subfields. So then I took this list of names which failed to reconcile in LCNAV, and I used OpenRefine, which I agree with everyone else is a wonderful tool, and I used it to reconcile against Wikidata. So this further narrowed down my set. And then I used OpenRefine again to narrow to the most likely candidates, such as no date string at all. If there was a partial date string, I figured maybe there was something in LCNAV and it was just a possible mix-up due to punctuation, date headings, things like that, and a good match in Wikidata. And then, as Zoe described, I, had to begin the manual part of the work. Reviewing one at a time to, in fact, double check against NACO and Wikidata, and then creating NACO records, which I then shared with Everett, who's our NACO cataloger. So that's about it for the workflow, and I'll turn it over to the next person. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gioia. Finally, I will pass it to Charlene to discuss our subject authorities pilot.
I'm particularly interested in the subject indexing in Wikidata and comparison between the LC subject heading and Wikidata. Before joining the PCC Sequoia Wikidata pilot, I have looked into some topics, including disputed islands, literary genres, cultural generation, and movement. And I'm going to explore more subjects later on. So some of my observations are listed here. For example, the strength of Wikidata is including engaging in the user community, such as the list of items under categories in the Wikimedia Commons. And you also can see a certain property are important for certain subject terms, such as disputed islands, which maybe will be interest for the scholars community. On the other hand, there's some challenges. For example, I discovered a lot of inconsistent labels, ineffective troubleshooting tips, and duplicate items. So for LC subject headings, as you know, they are very specific guidelines, and they are the hierarchical relationship between broader terms, narrow terms. You also can see related terms, and also has better quality control and consistent maintenance. On the other hand, it's pretty hard for scholarly community engagement. So far, I have explored category in Wikidata, Wikimedia Commons, and Wikipedia. I'm particularly interested in the category. It means including Commons category, topics, main category, categories, main topic, category combines topics and related category. I also create a new category and subcategory to link items, to link terms in Wikimedia Commons and Wikidata. Next. So this is an example you can see. There's one of the disputed island called Senkaku Islands. On my left-hand side, you can see this LC subject headings. You can see this one. You probably get some sort of implication as this name being changed somehow around 1985 into Japanese form. And you can find some information, somehow this island also has Chinese form. So you can see that kind of information in LC subject heading. on the other hand, you see the right-hand side, I want to compare with the Wikidata. And I really love this specific property called territory claimed by. So you can see this island being claimed by 3 different countries. And that really would be helpful for scholarly community. Next. This is another example of disputed island. And on my right-hand side, you can see Kuril Islands with that geographic qualified Russia, so you know the sovereignty. And however, you don't really find other information right here. But on my left-hand side, you see this property country in Wikidata. And also each country, you can see the qualifier with the starting time, ending time. And this kind of information really helpful to see the history of sovereignty. Next. So this is another thing I've been trying to do is try to link items for related. So as you can see, Kuril Island. So when I check the Kuril Island under the category, disputed and also the subcategory, you can see a list from A to Z, but I couldn't find Kuril Islands there. So that's why I try to figure out how to do it. So on my right-hand side, you can see Kuril Island being included in the subcategories. Next. So this is another thing I've been trying to do is create a new item in Wikidata. The main reason why I picked this topic because this is one of the richest genres in contemporary China. And this is a very important literary genre in Chinese literature. So you can see from down to the countryside movement linked to this group of people called Ziqing, also called Sendang youth and rusticated youth. You can see different labels in Wikidata, in Wikipedia, and also in Wikimedia Commons. But you can see very interesting relationship is cause effect between these 2 items. So the one I create a new one, the Ziqing literature is a very important one. I can link them together also for different kind of literary genre term, and they're all related. That's all. Go back to you, Alex.
Thank you, Charlene. And thank you to all of our pilot participants at NYU Libraries for giving such a great overview of their wonderful work. Now that we've shared with you, we want to spend a little bit of time synthesizing the broader question of why we are interested in engaging with Wikidata. So for one, Wikidata is an example of open access metadata. It carries with it a CC0 license, which is a public domain style license. Libraries, archives, and museums often talk about issues of siloing and the sequestering of our rich collections and metadata that we curate. So Wikidata offers us an opportunity to explore what it's like to break down those silos and create metadata out in the open. And as Beth mentioned, in relation to the Manga project, creating in the open comes with challenges and kind of tensions and opportunities for discussion as well. I think Everett noted this, or maybe I did, but increasingly Wikidata is becoming a hub of identifiers. So on the left, you can see a few identifiers on a sample Wikidata page. And on the right is a report of the Library of Congress automated process to both add LC identifiers to Wikidata and vice versa. So as we start to add URIs to our marked data, like we're doing with a couple of our projects mentioned today, Wikidata allows us to both contribute to and access this widely connected data. Wikidata as an open platform with a vast, hyper-engaged community of editors encourages libraries to reconsider long-established norms, workflows, and protocols. And that's happening in almost all of our pilot projects. So for example, when it comes to our name authority work, our various pilot projects related to names are really giving us a chance to review the data attributes considered mandatory for creating unique, unambiguous entities. And this results in practices like NACO Lite, which Gioia mentioned, which is an emerging practice involving encoding fewer data points in authority records. Wikidata also gives us the chance to see how it goes to create name identifiers in multiple systems. And crucially, it expands the user community beyond PCC libraries, as touched on by both Everett and Beth and Alla. Wikidata can also open up new ways to get to know our collections, both for users and staff. So in addition to web search knowledge cards, libraries are experimenting with adding knowledge panels to their systems. And here's a screenshot taken from some of the wonderful material the LD4 discovery group has been creating. And so you can see here a panel from Michigan State University, which dynamically queries subjects in their digital collections records and pulls in data and images from Wikidata. On the right, there's also potential for using Wikidata to add data points not available in our own metadata to conduct analysis of our collections. So here you can see an example from Beth and Alla's project. So once we have Wikidata identifiers, we could pull in additional information, for example, occupation or award, which could be interesting for our for the subject and reference librarians to use as they think about collection development. So moving forward, we'll be continuing to work on our Wikidata pilot projects throughout this year. We're looking forward to experimenting with some of the batch loading tools. We're still doing quite a lot of manual editing, so we're looking to do that. And beyond this pilot, we hope this experience will spark more Wikidata projects and the growth of our collaborative community of practice at NYU Libraries. We want to continue to explore how to make our collections more visible and findable on the wider web. And finally, there's also an opportunity to experiment with the underlying software powering Wikidata, which is Wikibase, for our local linked data needs. To find out more, we invite you to check out our project page on Wikidata or get in touch with me to talk further. And with that, we'll wrap up and look forward to some Q&A.
Thank you for those really great and thought-provoking presentations. We do have several questions that came in, so but continue if others occur to you, continue to put them in the Q&A. I think I will start with, this is a question for Zoe about the Yale project. Will future additions to SCF in Wikidata be an automated batch process or manual one-on-one additions?
The answer to that is we don't know yet. That is still kind of just in my head currently. Hopefully it's in multiple people's heads, but I feel like ideally we would be able to work out a workflow well enough for as long as someone has access to OpenRefine and they have the workflow, they would be able to clean and upload the data themselves. Or I mean, another party could do it, but it would be much easier. I feel like that would be the ideal situation, although it does require some preparation in advance to kind of get a lot of this workflow cleaned up. But I can imagine that there might be stopgap measures where we manually add entries in. So that's all I can say at this point. Nothing has been decided yet.
Okay, thank you. And then Everett wanted to know if you could talk a little bit more about your encounters with the Wikidata work and edition data models. At NYU, they've encountered the same sort of inconsistent application of the two data models in Wikidata. And have you made any specific policy or workflow decisions on that topic?
This is also for me, I'm guessing. I guess mostly the policy decision that we made with our application profile is that we would create two separate entities. If kind of every once in a while we did encounter an entity that already existed in Wikidata that was kind of a combined work and edition, and for that we basically had a workaround where we kind of designated it to be more of a work or more of an edition, and then uploaded the corresponding entity on the other level, and then kind of did some manual fiddling around to make them match up, which is not perfect. I understand. And some things are hard to split up. We did some of the entries in SCF are actually databases, so they're online resources, and for those, we treated those more like combined works and editions because it doesn't really make sense for a database to have editions, I suppose. I'm not up on my integrating resources cataloging, so, but that's what we decided in those cases. But in general, the data is a little bit messy, and you know, it definitely caused some complications. And I think anyone who is working at least with monographic bibliographic metadata needs to understand that you will encounter that in Wikidata.
Thank you. Yeah, so next I have the next question is specifically regarding the Manga project, but I think it will lead to a broader discussion for the next couple of questions, which is having to do with the Wikidata community changing the genre statements. And they just wanted clarification on whether you change it back to where you originally put it there, or do you start a discussion about it on Wikidata to come to some consensus on how you resolve that, if you have.
Hi, I think that is an excellent question. And I think, well, currently we haven't changed anything back. So anything that was shoujo manga as a genre and has been switched to sort of targeted audience, it's still like that. But we've been talking about whether or not to switch it back, or first to have the discussion with the anime manga Wikidata community. And I think that is the next step, is the sort of discussion with you know, the person who switched it, and then also the larger group to see you know, what makes sense. You do see shoujo as a genre in other places. As young men, young girl manga is often used as a genre. So, so it's a tricky situation. But the next step is to sort of talk to the community, I think, of Wikidata, and then decide whether or not to switch it back. Because at this point, I feel like it doesn't make sense to somebody switches what you've done and then you've just changed it back, and then it could be a kind of ongoing back and forth editing that doesn't ultimately work toward you know, a useful information. So that's kind of where we are, but it's a really good question.
Yeah, and I would just say, like, thank you, Beth. Yeah, it is a really interesting situation, and it's kind of, it can be a little bit frustrating to have that happen to your data that you've added, but it's you know, I was sort of like thrilled because it means we can really like have a conversation, and you know, the benefit of kind of doing this work in a group as we're doing is that we can support each other and, you know, help draft, you know, comments or conversation, and, you know, support each other as we engage on this platform. And the other thing I'll say is we are keeping track of all of our items using the on focus list of Wikipedia project property. So that's going to make it easier for us to do some batch changes if we need to, once we've had this conversation within the community.
May I add just one little thing? Early on, I encountered this issue because description for manga is comics created in Japan, and we're dealing specifically with artifacts that are created outside of Japan. So I reached out to the community. There is a discussion group for manga and anime, and I was just told, I felt it would be rude to correct without consulting community, especially so much work was already done for the manga at large editing on Wikidata. And I received this sort of a shrug, like it's Wikidata. If you feel it's important to change, just change it. So there is this, I think, a certain level of collegiality and trust is going on. And if in Beth's case, when there was a shoujo the property was switched from one to another, I think it is very, very useful to engage with with the people. We don't know who corrects us. It may be a person who just started and does it out of the best intention, but doesn't know really the implications of that. So I noticed that one of my Russian manga records was amended by adding the copyright statement property, but this was it. Nothing else was changed. So there is a level of cooperation completely independent of each other, of course, but also I think there is the way that there is a platform to discuss this thing is super important.
Yeah, so I'm wondering that can kind of open up this general topic, I think, to all the panelists that have more to say. I think the evolving nature of the Wikidata community, and that's a great example of where it's viewed as a positive thing where you can discuss it and get feedback and get buy-in for either changes or how you're doing things. There is also the darker side of that, where I know that there have been examples from some institutions involved in the PCC Wikidata pilot where they get their, get statements removed or reverted repeatedly by, I'd say, overzealous Wikidata editors. And, wondering if people have confronted that or have had any, or just generally about, I think the looseness of standards compared to what we're used to in cataloging and kind of coping with that in this new environment. And any comments on any of those more general areas?
I think we're just hardwired as catalogers. We're hardwired to certain standards, and it is hard for us to wrap our heads up around the fact that it is different system, different platform. It's just people don't know about our standards. How can they comply with us? So I have no better suggestion than just to try to explain to people.
Yeah, I would just add that, it's a big kind of culture mindset shift to edit in the open. And that I think, we're going to also be exploring using Wikibase. So if we really need things to be a certain way, maybe we need to do that in our own platform. And that a large shared platform isn't the place to have that level of control. And I think the beauty of linked data is that we could link to the Wikidata item, from our own Wikibase if we need to do that. So I think that's going to be an area that I'm interested in exploring.
All right, we have a question for those working with non-English collections. So wanting to know, what is your practice regarding label using translation or transliteration?
Yeah, Yahsa or actually most of us in our NYU pilots. Yeah, does anybody want to take that one?
I'll just mention that for the Afghanistan digital libraries, our practice hasn't been so far, at least, to include translations, but I believe we discussed that at least a couple times in our group meetings. But that's one of the open questions still, I believe. And I'm curious to know what Alla and Beth are doing for the manga collection too. I'm not sure.
Well, I can say for the Japanese manga, we took the information from the NYU bibliographic records, right? And so these are cataloged with the Romanized title as well as the Japanese title, but not a translation unless it was an English manga, and that's a separate thing. And so for the Japanese manga, in putting it in Wikidata, we used the Romanized Japanese manga, Japanese title, unless there was an existing Wikidata page that had already had a translation of the title. So I didn't go in and change those titles to what we have at NYU. I just put the information we have in our NYU catalog into those existing records, right? But it is a really good question in terms of consistency. It's like one of those things that falls into the question of consistency. If you're creating a new Wikidata page, should you use a translation or a transliteration or just the Japanese, right? So I think up until now, we've been using a transliteration and the Japanese and not adding an English title. There's a space for alternate title, or, you know, so it could go in there if there's a kind of common use English term or English title, but not in the Japanese title. So in that sense, it's still a mixture, and it is part of this discussion of inconsistencies. So it definitely come up a lot in our discussions. But because we're adding to a community of information that is partly existing already, we tried to build on that and also be consistent with what we have at NYU.
On the Russian Cyrillic end, we discovered that, first of all, I don't see the real need to create English language label if this work has not been translated. But since it appears in Romanized transliterations in our catalog, I do include them, just like Beth, in the English label. I include the transliteration. I add also known as in other possible transliterations. So people who don't know transliteration, romanization rules of Library of Congress still will be able to find it if they're trying to find it through this venue. I've also discovered that some browsers corrupt the diacritic symbols, and there is nothing I can do about it, but others don't. So it's impossible to predict what people are being using. So I'm just leaving them as is right there.
Yeah, and yeah, I wanted to also just say that a consideration of ours is our workflow and effort that we have time to put in. So we have LC transliterations in our records, so then we'll use those. That was a conversation point that we had, and I just wanted to point out as well that Charlene added to shared that when creating items with a transliterated form, she would add native label from the original script. I don't know, Charlene, do you want to add a little bit more about that?
Yes, for something, as Alex, you also mentioned, commonly used in the United States, but it's transliterary form. On the other hand, we really want to take advantage of Wikidata as a multilingual platform. So adding the native label there is really helpful for searching. And also, I just want to mention one feature there. There's a multilingual site. So you can link a lot of different language together. So there's a lot of potential there to link different form together in Wikidata.
Yeah, I think with the Afghanistan Digital Library project, we're also going to be experimenting with the native name and native language property, and then use qualifiers to show that it's an LC romanization transliteration.
I cannot add too much more to this, but I do want to draw people's attention to what Alexandra posted in the chat about the label guidelines, because those are very helpful, even though they're a little bit confusing. But they were helpful guidelines for us when deciding what to do with some of our labels. We were, in some ways, we were lucky because we didn't have to worry about transliterations of anything. Might also show the more Western European bent of that database, but that's another thing. But we did have to think about if we are including only labels in their native language, then those with English as their main Wikidata language, they don't see a label. And what do we do? That I think stymies a lot of people who do not realize that if there is no English label and you're set to English on Wikidata, you're not going to see anything. So we eventually decided to do a kind of workaround that we have seen in use in Wikidata a lot, which is to just plop the French label or the Spanish label, or whatever, into the English label. And so even though it's not in English, it will show up. So it's kind of fudging it a little bit. It's not exactly what Wikidata is for, but at the same time, according to those label guidelines, you're not really supposed to perform your own like folk translation of labels. So plus that is additional work that we cannot all perform. So that is kind of a workaround. But I do want to echo what Charlene said about like the incredible potential just for the multilingual nature of Wikidata is really great. And like, it's something that is not really found or implemented very well in our current library catalogs. So just the fact that if you set your Wikidata to Mandarin or whatever, you will see the Mandarin label up there. If it has a label, like that's kind of revolutionary almost compared to what many of us are used to. So I think there's great potential in that.
Anyone else have anything else on that topic? All right. So there's a question for the NYU folks working with faculty records or items in Wikidata. So have you had any requests to not be included or to take down? And any declining, please don't put me in there.
Actually, it's interesting. Full disclosure, we do have a form letter that's quite, it's been in place for a long time about the NACO component of it, and we're still kind of tweaking the part about contacting the faculty member and saying, if there's not a Wikidata item for them, are you willing for us to create them? So that's been kind of like hit or miss so far in terms of like how many people we've contacted. But I will say a totally anecdotal observation is that of the probably, 25 to 50 faculty members we've contacted with the Wikidata element asking about that, 3 of them have said no, we don't want you to create that item. And I don't know, we've had a lot of internal discussion among our group saying, do we know why that is? Is it more a fact that they think it's like a Wikipedia item as opposed to a Wikidata item? We don't have a way yet of following up with them to know exactly what their concern with the creation of a Wikidata item is. So that's something that's really interesting to us, and we might try and find a way to push through that.
So I just wanted to share at the University of Minnesota when that part of our actually, as part of our LD4P project was adding just selected a very small subset of faculty and researchers to Wikidata just to test the batch processing and so on. And we just chose our School of Public Health. And what we got our initial metadata set from our the university's researcher database, which is branded as Experts at Minnesota. And since those individuals, when they, entered their information into that platform, they got to choose whether the data was public or not. We chose to have that as implicit consent, that though we only included those who said, yes, this is fine to be public, and just we're repurposing the data in another platform. And we cleared it with the liaison to that school. But then we had the principle that if we ever did get a takedown request, we would honor that and remove it. But so far we haven't. So we weren't quite as proactive as you were in getting the permissions. But we took a little more, try not to do harm, but we're not going to necessarily notify them in advance that we're doing this. But so far we haven't had any negative repercussions.
Yeah. I think Everett can speak more to this, but we're doing this just for those who don't have items already. If someone does have an item in Wikidata, we're looking to enrich it. But yeah, that more in-depth conversation happens if they're just not yet represented in Wikidata.
Just wanted to circle back to, we touched on it a little bit, but making sure there was not any other examples or further discussion of.
Oops, I think you got muted.
Yep. Sorry, I just realized that. Okay. Just wondering about, back to the question of the community and whether you adopted a change based on what the community, preferences or guidelines were.
I can start that out. I think mostly we've seen that happening with Beth and Alla's project, which really does have a hyper engaged, amazing manga and anime community out there. But I think, some of our discussions, like Beth mentioned that she's creating edition pages now, and that was because we all looked at WikiProject Books and we're like, whoa, maybe we want to try that. But so it's kind of like trying to reconcile these different approaches and models. So it's a mix of, I would say, looking at the wiki projects and what's going on there. And then, and sometimes those are in conflict, I guess. But I don't know if Beth and Alla, you want to speak more to that.
The only thing I would add is that, all of this is subjective, right? So the description of mangaka or, Japanese manga author or just manga author, but including the gender, to say josei mangaka, I didn't think that was necessary at all. Why would you put, manga artist and then put woman manga artist? That just didn't make any sense to me, right? So it made me think about, well, who's doing that? Who's creating a wiki page where they felt that to put the author, the description of the author as woman, when there is a separate item that you could include gender. So I found those things easy for me to change, right? Because it just seemed like, of course we would do that. And then I realized, well, maybe not, because this is a global production. Some people may feel it's necessary to say, woman manga author, especially when, so many of our collection were written by women, right? So at any rate, I was trying to think of this as a reference librarian and think of it as, how do we advise people to find related resources that might be useful to their scholarly, research. And so it's just an example of something that struck me as, why would anyone put it that way? And then I had to realize, well, in the global community, maybe some people feel like it's important to specify woman in that particular area. So that's all to say that, it's a learning process.
So we had a follow-up to the back to the NYU faculty names. Have you encountered any notability issues? I know that other participants have encountered that, where the it gets flagged for notability.
We have not encountered that yet. Like I said, the Wikidata component is still, and as Alex described, the majority of those Wikidata items that we have updated to this point have been those that pre-existed. So we weren't creating new ones. On the other hand, a lot of our faculty do have, published works, whether they're journals or, book literature, et cetera, or, performing arts works, et cetera. So we feel like in that sense, most of them cross the notoriety threshold and notability threshold, but we also have a lot of young faculty members who will have to look at the notability issues and thresholds carefully in terms of how that plays out. But the short answer is no, we have not encountered that yet, but it may be one of the components that's kind of made us a little hesitant or a little not quite as proactive in terms of reaching out to create new Wikidata items with our form letter as we have with, NACO identifiers.
Well, I think we have about 5 minutes left. If there are any final questions or thoughts. Thank you for the lively discussion. This has been great.
Thank you so much for moderating. I have a question for Zoe. I was wondering if you are thinking about using mix and match for future SCF Wikidata integration workflows. Yeah, just curious if you've explored that.
I have not. It's maybe been on the very, very edge of my mind, but I'll admit I am not sure how to, at the moment, I'm not sure how to like integrate my own, I guess, authority file into that. I know the basics of how it works, but that is an interesting option. You're saying for the actual titles within to match them to Wikidata works. I mean, that's an interesting prospect. And I mean, thank you for bringing it a little further up to the top of my mind for that.
Yeah, I can't say like I haven't done it yet, but I know there's folks out there in the LD4 community and elsewhere who have done it. So I'm curious too about like applications for that tool.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it seems to be a kind of low barrier way to get your authority file or to get your vocabulary into Wikidata. So I think we need to explore all those different options.
Okay, we have just a few more minutes, so if nobody has more questions, I guess we could just end it here. So I want to thank the presenters for these excellent presentations. These are really interesting projects, and thank Christine for moderating the discussion, and everybody for raising these interesting points. Once again, the Slack channel for the Wikidata channel is available if anybody wants to continue the discussion after the session. And again, this session will be recorded and available on YouTube if you would like to watch it again.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.